Welcome to the show, folks. This is Wrestling Changed My Life. Here we go.
I caught an elbow and got my teeth knocked out. And I remember holding them in my mouth and running over the trainer, hey, wrap it up. Let's go. Get me to the dentist. And John came over and grabbed me by the elbow. He's like, son, they're out. They ain't going back in. Get back out there. And I was like, oh, there's levels to this now. And I went back out there and proceeded to get beat.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. It's Wrestling Changed My Life. This is your host, Ryan Warner. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite holidays of the year. And before we get to the episode, folks, I should just let you know that yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. So thank you very much for tuning in, whether this is your first episode or you've listened to all of them. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate everyone tuning in. So thank you very much. Many, many, many years to come for the Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. Okay, our guest today is the great Chris Pendleton, head coach at Oregon State, 2-time national champ for the Oklahoma State Cowboys back in his heyday. He knocked off Ben Askren a number of times in his career, and he's one of the greats, one of the best 2-timers to ever do it. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation, folks. Fan of the week goes to my man, Joseph M. Jameson. He's a wrestling coach, the head coach at Ursinus College Wrestling. I may be butchering this name, folks, but the college is URSINUS. Regardless, Joseph, thank you so much for the support. Greatly appreciate it. Last but not least, folks, if you want to support the show, please leave us a review or rating on Apple. You can do so by scrolling to the bottom of the feed, hitting whatever stars you want, and that counts as a rating or review. That's it, ladies and gents. Let's give it up for the great one, Chris Pendleton.
Whew, okay, let's do it. I'm ready.
No problem, man.
I'm ready. I cannot wait to watch your Smiths documentary.
I really appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun to get out there and interview all these guys. And
I'm glad somebody's finally telling Pat's story. I mean, Pat's really a very quiet guy, a very humble guy. I mean, you literally would never know that you're talking to the first 4-timer. And I can tell you some funny Pat Smith stories for sure. I hated Pat for the first year of college, maybe even the first 2 years. I literally despised Pat Smith. So
why?
You see these teeth right here? These are not my real teeth. And it was fine. You know, you're going in. Pat picked me up from the airport in Oklahoma City, took me to Walmart, helped me buy towels, bedding, everything. I'm like, this guy's awesome. You know, in Oklahoma State, we don't really go live the first month or 2 months of your college career. You're drilling, you're learning technique, you're learning the setup routines, you're learning all that. I remember wrestling with Pat and Shane Roller and Tyrone and Branch, and I'm like, oh, this is easy. I got this. No problem. Then John's like, all right, hey guys, today we're gonna go group of 3 live. And I'm like, oh yeah, live. You know, you start getting really hungry after drilling for that long. And I remember just it was like a Wolverine came at me. I slapped hands with Pat and just bam, just started beating the living tar out of me. And at some point, I caught an elbow and got my teeth knocked out. And I remember like holding them in my mouth and like running over the trainer, like, hey, wrap it up. Let's go. Get me to the dentist. And John came over and grabbed me by the elbow. He's like, son, they're out. They ain't going back in. Get back out there. And I was like, oh, there's levels to this now. And I went back out there and proceeded to get beat. I mean, and when people don't really understand, like when I say like Pat was good. Like he beat me like I've never been beat in my life. And I remember I was in sweats, shirt, shorts, knee pad, practice ended, and I literally crawled off the mat, out the door, walked down the stairs of Gallagher, right across the street to Bennett, to the dorms, straight up to my bedroom, and got right under the covers in my full workout gear, and just was like, I made a horrible mistake. I'm not cut out for Oklahoma State.
And so that lasted for 2 years, though.
Yeah, well, I'm also a very stubborn and prideful guy. So, when you're just getting beat like that, and Pat had an amazing way of like getting into my head. And for the longest time, I was young, and you have these conversations with your athletes now, like where when a coach criticizes you, you look at it like they're picking on me. Oh, you're picking on me. Why are you always picking on me? And Pat would do stuff. I'd be winning sprints in the room, and he'd be like, Chris, you're not going hard enough. And I'd get irate. I would get furious. And for the longest time, I just couldn't separate that. He wasn't picking on me. He was helping me separate from the rest of the pack. He was teaching me lessons. And I think it was, I went to Thanksgiving with him at the Smith's house, and that's a whole nother story. But I stayed the weekend with him, and, we went hunting, and I just got to like kind of get a deeper understanding of Pat and realize that he wasn't picking on me, that he really did help change my life. And Pat had a unique way of breaking down wrestling into like the most simplest form. And you're looking at a guy that's the first 4-time NCAA champion. I mean, and I can't even imagine the pressure of being the first 4-timer, but imagine the pressure of being John Smith's little brother that's trying to accomplish that monumental task. And Pat was underrated, but he had a great ability to just simplify wrestling. Or I remember like when I was struggling with like my setups and getting my offense going, he's like, you're thinking too much, make it simple. He's like, it's just a man your size against another man your size. All you have to do if offense is just basically get 2 hands locked around the leg, and that's it. He's like, don't think about all the other stuff. He's like, just think about getting 2 hands locked behind a leg. And I was like, yeah, actually, that's really what shooting is. So it's little lessons like that Pat was just really, really good at, crawling up in your head and calming you down. But also, I think every Oklahoma State guy around his weight class can tell you that, he was viciously brutal on the mat. I think all of our shoulders are all torn up because he had this bar series where he'd put a bar on your back and just, it was painful.
Dude, a lot of people talk about John and or Pat using that bar arm and just being nasty with it on top.
No, it affected my wrestling. I love that bar series, and Pat would like remember when he was showing it to you, like just teaching it. It was like, oh my God, like you're trying to hurt me, and he kind of was like, hey, I've never seen somebody like actually rip their shoulder off. Usually people go over before that happens. So I was like, yeah, give them a point. So no, until you feel it, until you experience it, I can tell you talk to Kevin Ward or Jake Rochon or Zach Esposito. Zach was a little small, so he didn't have this special treat of having Pat Smith with his bar series, but then having Mark Branch with his leg ride series. Got good on bottom. You really got good on bottom, and it wasn't technique, it was survival. That's what it boiled down to. Just surviving, being able to walk out of practice.
Dude, that's crazy. The fact that Mark was still there as an assistant too. I mean, your coaching staff, like the paid assistants, incredible wrestlers, and you guys just had guys around. Was DC around during that time?
Oh man,
Yeah.
it's you know, not to brag, but it is a brag of uh, Oklahoma State guys are a little bit unique where we are all extremely close. I mean, like we all enjoy hanging out with each other. We vacation with each other. We, like being a first year head coach, I mean, I'm on the phone almost daily with one of my alumni asking questions. They're calling, checking in on me. And the group that we had with our coaching staff, John, Pat, Branch, and then Guerrero, and then we had Jamil Kelly, Daniel Cormier, Eric was still training, Mo Wall, Shane Roller. I mean, we were very fortunate to have all those people around. And the best part is when you really look at it, is they're all really good people, like really, really good people. I genuinely enjoyed being around my coaches. Daniel cutting my hair. Jamil's still one of my best friends. I'd go on family vacations with Branch. I'd go hang out with Pat. I mean, John was always scary, so we didn't go hang out at John's. No, we went to John's house, but it was just really. It wasn't just like the accolades of the people. It was who they were as people, as human beings. I mean, they were all good men.
I've noticed that by interviewing all the Oklahoma State guys from the 80s and 90s. Even then, when you meet them now, there's a lot of humility, a lot of humbleness. A lot of them have been able to move on and have successful careers, whereas some guys from other programs, they're stuck in that time and they can't get past whatever era was their era. So I have noticed that with the Oklahoma State guys. It's awesome.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things is your first lesson that you learn when you walk into Gallagher and you walk into the Oklahoma State room. You have John Smith, who's literally the greatest American wrestler of all time. And when you walk up, the first lesson he tells you is no one's bigger than the program. And it kind of just puts it in perspective right away that if this guy is telling me that, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to accomplish, but it's probably not going to be what he's done. And he's telling me that I'm not bigger than the program, that you kind of have a loyalty to the program, and you're kind of seeing it a little bit, and I'll go on a little rant where you're seeing a lot of the name. Are you familiar with the name, likeness, and image stuff that's happening?
Yeah.
That does the athlete build the school's brand? Does the school build the athlete's brand?
Mm-hmm.
I'll always watch an Oklahoma State football game, and I couldn't tell you who's on the team. We are all loyal to a program that's done so much for us and helped change our lives. I mean, the name of the podcast, How Wrestling's Changed Our Lives. And, I have a good life because I went to Oklahoma State, because I was surrounded by men with character that taught me the right things.
Yeah. And I've heard you say that before, and I thought about that, and I wrote it down as a note. I'm like, that's interesting that John would say that, but it makes sense because when he was at the prime of his career in 91, he took that head coaching job, and really he's told me that was a huge distraction for him and almost threatened him not winning that 6th title.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine it. And not only that, I'm 38 years old, and I'm one of the youngest head coaches in the country. He was 26.
And still training.
Yes. Like, that's like Burroughs just right now saying, you know what, I'm just going to be the head coach of Penn State right now.
Right.
And Jordan's even older. So, I mean, that's like Kyle Snyder. Like, I don't know how much coaching experience John had at that point. I really don't think much of,
none,
or if any. I mean, like recruiting, the administration. I mean, all like the enormity of all the stuff that goes into being a head coach.
Well, let's talk about that, because I've heard you say in your after you got hired, you've done a number of interviews of how different it is to be a head coach versus an assistant coach, and you hear a lot of people saying that. What do you actually mean by that?
You have to it's a bigger picture thing. As an assistant coach, you can kind of like just focus in on an area and get your job done. There's a lot of times like you have to kind of factor in about 30 different things because, you're having 30 different conversations. You're having a conversation with the parent, with an athlete, with the administration, with the trainer, with the strength coach, with the nutritionist, where you have the understanding what the bigger picture is, but getting that message across to everybody. I think that is probably the biggest thing, is you got to just kind of be that encompassing CEO.
Now, I can only imagine. I mean, you think about an assistant coach, it seems like
during the pandemic.
Seriously, man. I mean, the fact that you guys just got on the mat for the first time yesterday, you said it's
no,
crazy.
Last Monday.
Gotcha. Okay. So it's a little bit now. So let's get to your career a little bit. You grew up in Lemoore, California, and from what I read, a little bit of a late bloomer in the wrestling sense, starting in middle school. When did you make the jump to going from fourth in the state to being a state champ? Like, what happened?
I made the jump. I made my big jump between my sophomore and junior. I made a jump between my sophomore and junior year, where this is a true story. And if I had my box unpacked, I'd show you. I don't keep a lot of memorabilia. I don't keep a lot of my trophies or anything like that. I still have my camper card from the Oklahoma State wrestling camp. And that changed my life, where I had an experience, because at that point I just didn't want, it was just going through the motions. I was just having fun. It was a hobby, but I got to be around some of the legends of the sport. And I remember John does this camp speech where he talks about taking ownership and accountability. And he was saying that challenged us to do an hour a day on our own, away from our parents, away from our coaches, to have that ownership of our career. And I did about half an hour. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And, I did it probably like 60%. And I jumped from being in and out of the starting lineup to fourth place in the state. And that's when you hear people say that winning is the most addictive thing out there. And it really is. Like, once you get a taste of it, you just want to do it and more. Where I was like, okay, I kind of committed to this. Now I know if I do an hour extra every single day, it's going to reward me. And I did. This is, it's kind of crazy. Like, I was saying, like, lifetime ago, I was so young. I did an hour a day running, lifting, watching film, shadow wrestling, grabbing my brothers and just beating them up and trying some new things. And I went from fourth place in the state to state champion, outstanding wrestler, 62-0, and I think I had like 57 pins. And I went to the Reno tournament, and this is where I at that point, I had one recruiting letter from Cal State Bakersfield going into my senior year. And I remember I went to the Reno tournament at Champions, and I pinned the number 2, 3, and 4 guys in the nation, all back to back. And I remember walking off the mat, like college coaches were just boom right there in your face, and they were recruiting those other kids. And I remember walking with Rob Cole, like when he was just getting Cornell coming up, and he was like, hey, Ivy League, blah blah blah, doing this, and he's handing me the pamphlets, and my mind's just spinning. And I see John when we're walking through the casino, he's walking away, going to his room, because we're in Reno, Nevada. And I'm like, oh, that sucker didn't come talk to me. He didn't come talk to me. And then just randomly I ran into him, and he just goes, hey, you want to be a cowboy? I'm like, yeah. And that was literally it for my recruiting.
Who came out on the trip, if anyone?
To what?
To your house? Did they ever
come
out?
No. I ran into him when we were leaving the
But after that, though,
I did. I took official visits to Arizona State. I took visits to Iowa State. Arizona State was coached by Leroy Smith at the time, so I got to meet Leroy. And then Bobby Douglas at Iowa State, and John at Oklahoma State. And it was funny because I was really close to Iowa State. Joe Heskett was, he's just an awesome human being, and getting to know him. And then, Kale's Kale. So when I was, a young high school kid looking at Kale, I think that was when he had just won his sophomore year. He just won his second straight title his sophomore year. So you're kind of like shocked by some of these guys. And this was pre-flow wrestling, pre all that, where you didn't see these people. You didn't have access to them. So like you didn't get to see all these interviews and everything. So it was like kind of like recruiting trips were like a whirlwind. And Oklahoma State was my worst recruiting trip. I couldn't stand it. I was sick. I actually was throwing up. My mom was driving me to the airport. I was throwing up on the way there. I had a fever. I had this guy on a recruiting trip named Scott Barker. I was a small guy. I wrestled 145 my senior year. Scott was a 197 pounder. He tried to beat me up on my recruiting trip. It just was like everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And at the time, and then I got my scholarship offer, and it was by far my lowest scholarship offer out of all the schools. And I think my mom and dad thought I was crazy when I told them I still was going to Oklahoma State, just because that was where I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be a Cowboy. So,
dude, and then the moment to me that really was probably a huge turning point in your career, Ty Wilcox goes down with a knee injury. Was that the gentleman who went out when you stepped in your freshman year?
True freshman year. I was at a house party and my phone rang, and it was like 1 a.m. And I remember, like, probably should have said that on a podcast, but it's true. I ran upstairs and hid in a closet and called John back. And he was like, "What are you doing?" I was like, just sleeping, coach. He's like, "Liar." He's like, "Hey, Ty went down, next man in." He's like, we're pulling you. I was like, okay. And I remember just like hanging up the phone and walking downstairs, and some of the other freshmen wrestlers were there. And I was like, they're pulling me out of red shirt. And I like just walked back to the dorm, like, okay, like I don't even know what to do. And then the funny part was my first match was Joe Heskett, Iowa State. Joe Heskett, Iowa State, the guy that hosted me on my recruiting trip to Iowa State, that was upset that I didn't go to Iowa State. And I remember being in the warm-up line, and John told me, like, right when the weigh-ins, like, they could do the draw. He's like, "Hey, they're going to draw you." I was like, "What?" He's like, "They're going to draw 165. I was like, "I thought it was random." He's like, "They're going to draw 165. I was like, "Great." So they drew 165. And I remember, like, when you're doing the face-off, Kale and Joe were wearing those old school Iowa State robes that, you see like Dan Gable, picture of Dan Gable in. And I was just wondering, like, well, why are they wearing the robes? And Pat's like, "Oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. No big deal." I got the first takedown, and then I proceeded to get teched. And that was fun. And then my next match was, I believe Bedlam, around there, 12,000 people. And, we had a team with Mark Munoz and Reggie Wright and Daniel Cormier, and there's little Chris just along for the ride, where I got whooped in that match. And then I had to go to Arizona State and wrestle the late, great Steve Blackford. Steve Blackford had 6 minutes and 45 seconds riding time against me.
No.
He took me down, rode me the whole first period. Then I look at John, and I believe he goes, like, just kind of give me one of those defer. I was like, all right, defer. He top. I was like, oh, great. So then I'm getting rode the whole second period. And at that point, like, I think any Oklahoma State guy would tell you, like, that's the point you don't make eye contact with John. Like, you just don't look at him. Like, when the matches are going like that, and I just kind of, like, looked over, and I was, like, going, like, neutral, and I heard, "Go down." I was like, I'm bottom. So then I got rode out the whole third period. So it wasn't the best start of a career.
And then you took the red shirt, and to me, that must have been a year of miraculous self-discovery, jumping levels. Those are my assumptions coming into it. You may tell me otherwise, but what happened during your red shirt?
Yeah, a little bit. It was an advantage where I got to actually go into my red shirt with a plan, like an idea. Sometimes red shirts just come in thinking, "Hey, I'm a red shirt." I knew what was out there now. I knew the Joe Hesketts. I knew the Robbie Wallers. I knew those guys now. That's the level I got to get to. And I remember I had Jake Rochelt was redshirting. We had a really good recruiting class with him, and Ty Wilcox had came back, so it was Ty's senior year, and Pat Popolizio was there at 74 and 84s, and Jake and I were redshirting behind them. You know, Jake was a 3-time NCAA champion himself, and I remember wrestling with Pat and Ty, and at some point, you know, you're getting beat up, and then you kind of just catch up a little bit. And I remember saying, okay, these guys are out there doing big things, but now I'm at that level. Now I can actually sit there, and it was awesome getting to watch because, you know, there's that whole debate, you know, that goes around that you don't have to be a great wrestler to be a great coach. And, you know, Pat Popolizio is one of the best coaches in the country, hands down. No one can argue that.
Mm-hmm.
Pat never All-American. And so people kind of equate that, well, he wasn't a great wrestler. Pat was a great wrestler. People realize Pat was ranked #1 in the country his senior year.
Mm-hmm.
#1 in the country. He beat Josh Lambrick from OU and Damian Hahn back-to-back weekends.
I didn't even think he wrestled at Oklahoma State, to be totally honest with you.
Huh?
He was at Oklahoma State during your time?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Man,
yeah.
That's incredible how many head coaches were there.
Like 10 or something like that. Oh, yeah, Teague Moore was training with us too. I always forget Teague. But, I mean, like, so I'm getting to wrestle Pat Popolizio, and he's ranked #1 in the country. And so, I mean, that's that's where did that self-confidence come? So I went from, I think I started the season my sophomore year ranked like 18th or 19th. I was ranked 3rd, and, you know, I think like a month I was ranked 3rd.
And what changed in your mentality?
Nothing really. I mean, I'm wrestling Pat Smith, I'm wrestling Mark Branch, I'm wrestling Jake Rochelle, I'm wrestling Pat Popolizio, Tyrone Lewis, Shane Roller. I mean, like, there's no better feeling than getting ready to step out on the mat and, like, looking on your right, there's Pat, looking on your left, there's Branch, and then, you know, John's behind you. I mean, like, that's
like, the
you
gang.
You know you're prepared. You know you're prepared. No one I'm gonna wrestle as tough as Pat and Branch, so I'm ready to go.
And one of the things I've heard you say about your time at Oklahoma State, outside of how close the teams were and how great the coaches were, was that you guys had some battles with Lehigh, which I never would have imagined. And you guys went in there, and you said it's one of the toughest places in the country to wrestle. Tell us about your experience there.
The Snake Pit, you know, the late, great Greg Strobel, Oregon State alum, you know, still heavy hearts talking about Greg. He's instrumental in helping change my life as a coach, bringing me and my family here to Corvallis. But, yeah, those teams were good. They had Troy Letters, Corey Cooperman, John Trenge. I mean, those were battles. And I remember I was wrestling Travis Frick, who was a second-generation All-American, but you don't see a lot of those. His dad was an All-American for Lehigh. He was an All-American. And I was on a little single, and he kicked out, and he just caught my lip. And, like, you know, just one of those, like, ones where blood started gushing. And I, like, just turned my head and was, like, you know, went injury time. And, you know, Oklahoma State, literally, if you're in Carver, you're in some of these ones, you could break your arm. And if you call injury time, you're getting booed. It's just what it is. Reputation, stereotype, whatever. So I literally am working for a major. I get kicked in the face. Blood's coming out. I like go like that and show the referee. He's like, oh, stop. And these old men run to the mat side, and they're like, get back in there. You're stalling. I was like, I'm not stalling. Like, I'm working for bonus points here. I'm bleeding. Like, no, but I'm telling you, those are the environments that make wrestling great, that you want your teams to be a part of, and, you know, getting me all excited for practice.
Man, it's just cool to hear you know, different environments that you don't usually think of when you think Oklahoma State. You think Iowa, you think OU, but, you know, cool that you guys were out there.
Lehigh definitely. Lehigh, I put Lehigh as my second or third favorite venue that I've wrestled in.
And what are the other two?
Carver and then Bedlam.
For sure. Okay.
Harbor, just because it's you know, it's a place. But luckily, when I was in college, it wasn't the loudest place.
You guys got the better of them. What, probably every year you guys wrestled Iowa during that time?
Yeah, we never lost to them when I was in school. My true freshman year, that was the closest one, where we had a guy named Charlie Walker, who this is how tough that those teams were. I mean, you know, it's kind of like one of the fun. I always love seeing those breakdowns of like this Penn State team versus this Oklahoma State team. So, you know who Johnny Thompson is?
Oh yeah.
Okay. So Johnny T was not a starter for the Iowa match. Charlie Walker was the starter. Charlie beat Eric Juergens, I believe, and took over the number 1 ranking in the country. And then Johnny beat him off the team, and Charlie had to go up to 41, and Johnny went and took second at the NCAAs.
Dude, you guys had not only some loaded teams, but just some personalities on those teams. Johnny Thompson, Hendricks, Mako came in there at the end, Esposito. I mean, what a group of guys.
Yeah, we were all like radically different from each other, but all extremely close. You know, it was fun getting to have and me and Jake couldn't wrestle together without it turning into something bad. Like, we couldn't train together. I mean, we would, but it would always be like, he was bigger, he was really good, he would always get the better of me, and it would drive me nuts. Where a lot of fist fights happened, a lot of, bad things were said, but then he would be over at my house half an hour later playing Halo. Johnny Hendricks, he used to just he would actually the level of self-confidence that Johnny Hendricks had, I just can't tell people. Like, I remember Espo and I were watching this like Sativa highlight tape, and Johnny walked in, was sitting down, and like, oh, I could beat that guy. And we're like, hey, this is like the best guy in the world right now. He's like, yeah, I could beat him. And he's like, okay. And then one time, like, I remember we were doing a top-bottom practice, and I ended up riding him for like 10, 15 minutes, and John was on him, and John said, time, he's like, Johnny, this and that. He's like, he could have rode you another half an hour. He's like, bet he couldn't do it in a match. I was like, what do you mean I couldn't do it in a match? I just did it. But his self-confidence and self-belief, I mean, I was jealous of it. Like, this guy was Jake Rochelle, he might be the most underrated wrestler in NCAA history. I mean, the guy lost one match in the NCAA tournament. One match at the NCAA tournament. But I remember him losing to Fresno State and Cal Poly on the same weekend and coming home. And I'm like, if that was me, the self-destruct button would have been pressed. I would have been in full panic mode. He sat there. He's like, you know what? It's a bad weekend. Whatever. And just let it go. Then just would go and major somebody that was ranked number 2 or 3 in the country.
Dude, that's ridiculous. I mean, the fact that, you guys would have, because the fact that you have goes that lasted that long is amazing to me, because growing up right next to the University of Iowa, everyone thought the Oklahoma State, they did drilling, they never wrestled live. But the more I learn about Oklahoma State, of course, they were having fist fights. They were going blows. It's nasty in there. But I think, not knowing that. It's
the biggest, like, I get asked that question a lot. And look at nowadays. Look at now. What team has the most MMA fighters?
Oklahoma State by a landslide.
What teams don't? The tough guy teams.
That's true.
I mean, that's where I people that say that, I'm like, well, by the numbers, those guys like to fight. I mean, I couldn't do UFC. I mean, I don't want getting punched in the face, but it's true. I mean, that was always like something a little annoying, like when we had to battle those perceptions. Jake Rochelle, going back to Jake, I'll tell you a story about how tough Jake was. The year that we had 5 NCAA champions, on February 7th, John Trenge at Lehigh, we just talked about Lehigh, John Trenge and Jake were wrestling. Jake tore his ACL, MCL, and I think his PCL. Completely destroyed his knee. He rode the Aerodyne bike all the way up to like the Big 12 tournament, I believe. Wrestled in the Big 12 tournament. And this was, like, again, pre-flow, all that, where you could keep secrets. Like, I remember Don saying, we're shutting the room down. No one talk about this. No one knows Jake got hurt. So he goes in, he loses to BJ Patton in the Big 12 finals. And I'm like, just watching him, like, this guy's gutting it out. Goes back and he's on the bike again. Goes to the NCAA tournament and wins it. Changes up his stance. And no one caught on to it. He changed his stance where I think he went from like a lefty to a righty or something. And he started doing his right-handed, right side high crotch a lot. He hit it on Sean Stender in the semifinals. Did all this and didn't have a knee brace. And I just remember every single session, 3-day tournament, 3 days of doing that on one leg. Every time we would be walking through the arena and everything, I mean, just you wouldn't even guess that he was hurt. The moment we got back to the hotel, I mean, you just saw a guy like just crumble, like lay in his bed, grabbing his knee, icing it, and you could just tell he was doing everything he could to keep it together in public, but privately, I mean, the man was hurt. He had reconstructive surgery the day after the NCAA tournament.
The mental strength is insane for a lot of these high-level guys like that. I mean, it's incredible.
I honestly don't know if I could have done it. I highly doubt I could have done it. But Jake was a special guy, and that's where like I get really picky because a lot of times like people talk about the grades and everything, and I'm like, the guy lost one match in the NCAA tournament, won it on one leg. Like, he's tough.
That's ridiculous, dude. Another guy from your era who doesn't get mentioned enough is Greg Jones. Did you guys ever scrap?
Yeah, he beat me. He beat me at the All-Star match.
That sophomore year?
I learned not to shoot a low single. He nailed me on 2 reshots in the first period and then picked neutral. And I remember going in my sophomore year. This is a hard lesson I had to learn. Going in my sophomore year, the NCAA tournament, everybody's like, Greg's 1, I was 2. He's the only one that really had beat me on the year, I believe. I think at that time he's the only one that had beat me. And I remember, like, you hear coaches say, just wrestle your match in the NCAA, don't look ahead. I remember it was quarterfinals, and, like, I'm watching Greg Jones wrestle Rashad Evans from Michigan State. And Rashad and I had a heck of a match in double overtime in Stillwater when he wrestled at Michigan State, where I couldn't take Rashad down. He took me down a couple times, but I turned him on top. And when we went to double overtime, I remember going to overtime being like, not shooting anymore on you. You're getting me. He's just faster, better athlete. But I was like, double overtime, I picked top, and I turned him. So I had the ability to turn on top. And I remember watching like the match, and I'm like watching Greg wrestle with Branch. And Branch like, hey, your match. Focus in. I'm like, he's going to lose. Like, he's going to struggle to take Rashad down. And sure enough, got upset. And in my mind, I remember being like, I just won a national title. Like, Greg was my number 1 competition. I just won a national title. And I stepped out against Brad Dillon from Lehigh, and I didn't win my national title. Brad beat me. And I remember just the whole match, I was like trying to get my focus, like zone in, snap out of it. And I just couldn't pull myself out. And that round, the number 1, 2, I believe 5 and 6 all went down in one round. Not bracket. Like, I remember, I just remember just like sitting there, like, I just screwed that up. Like, I just screwed myself.
What kind of conversation do you have with yourself to get back ready to make sure you finish as high as you can at that point?
Well, that was where everybody was kind of telling us that we were chokers, that Oklahoma State couldn't win, that we choked. And in that round, I was a number 2 seed. Mola Wall was a number 2 seed. Zach Esposito was a number 2 seed. I believe Roller was a 3 seed. Tyrone Lewis was a 2 seed. We all lost.
Oh, my God.
Kansas City, 0-3. And I remember being in the hotel room, and, you're crushed. You're devastated that, we just, all of our individual glory had just left. And John was like, got to wrestle for each other. We got to, come out. And we exploded on the backside. We got pin after pin after pin. Shane pinned Luke Becker. I pinned Webster from Oregon in the third place match in 15 seconds. And that probably was my favorite college moment, where I just remember, like, he rushed me out of bounds, and I looked at John, and he's like, he does it again, put him on his head. And so when he like run into me with double underhooks, I went double overs and launched him and got the pin. And when I got off the mat, John was like, gave me a hug. He's like, hey, mathematically, that just sealed the title.
Wow.
So that was my favorite moment. And I got to go back to the hotel, and I would always remember with Rochelle, where Jake's like, like I said, like they always took our phones on at the NCAA tournament and everything, where Jake's like, like
they would take your phones.
Oh yeah, they wouldn't let keep out the outside distractions. I mean,
I like it.
Different era.
Yeah.
It was, and in our minds, it wasn't a big deal. Like, yeah, here, take my phone. I mean, I got a mission.
So Jake had no idea what had happened when he got back.
Yeah, and I got to tell him, like, hey, we're national champions. Like, team job done. Go win your title now. And I had to drill with Jake at the end. They're in the finals, and that was awful. Oh, I remember, like, he's drilling for the NCAA finals for his championship.
Right.
And, like, I'm looking at the big stage. I'm looking at the ESPN cameras. I'm looking at all of it. I mean, like, this is supposed to be me. This is supposed to be my time. And, like, every time Jake would be done, I'd, like, go in the bathroom and, let out a little tear.
Yeah. There's nothing lonelier than, or more of a just kind of self-reflecting, to watch a finals, whether it's the middle school state finals, the high school state finals, in your case, the NCAA finals, when you think going into it you were going to be there and then you're not. Watching it in your street clothes is always a really interesting moment.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, when you start watching it and you get older, there's so many variables that go into winning an NCAA title, and you just start realizing how special it really is. I mean, I remember even 2 years ago, wrestling with Zahid before the finals, and just like watching him, just being like, man, this is insane. Like all the stuff that goes into it, like health, safety, just preparation, being mentally focused in. And then the last funny story before I gotta go with back to Pat Smith is his son Gus. It was one of the cool things because Pat's my hero. And so I was at the NCAA championship and ran into Pat in the hallway, and like I was like talking to him, and he's like, Gus, this is Chris, is one of my guys I coach and this and that. And you can tell little kids when they're like, they're impressed or they're just like, all right, whatever. Gus was not impressed at all by any of my credentials. And like, I'm like, he's like, yeah, he's a dominant wrestler, this and that. And he's like, yeah, whatever, Dad. I was like, all right. Hey, Gus, do you know who I coach? He's like, who? I was like, Zahid Valencia. And just instantly, like, eyes got big. He's like, Zahid? You know Zahid? Like, could I meet him? And I'm like, oh yeah, your dad's a 4-timer. I'm a 2-timer, but we're chopped liver. But now you want to meet Zahid? Now I'm cool. I was like, all right. Kind of laughed. And then I was talking to Pat, and Zahid and I are close, and he's like a little brother, where Zahid had to dig deep and figure out a way to win a title his junior year, and he did it. Where afterwards, I got to send Pat a text like, hey, why don't you bring Gus down in the tunnels and to meet Zahid? So I got a picture. It's actually at my house of me, Pat, Zahid, and Gus.
Wow.
And Gus was all excited and everything. And I'm just like laughing, just like, your uncle's John, your dad's Pat, and but hey, next generation, new era, new heroes.
And that's, it just shows you like the power of mentors and how much that can influence you, because Pat was yours. Let's sign off with this. How influential was your time spent coaching in Wyoming with Mark Branch?
It was a turning point in my career. I remember those people that actually told me, don't go to Wyoming, it'll be a career ender. And it was a career builder. I mean, I think Wyoming got me the job at Oregon State more than any other place I'd been at, where, we did some really good things, put out multiple All-Americans. I think we were ranked high as like 6th or 7th in the nation. And it was learning how to build a team. Mark had done, he had had a year or two there before me. But when I got there, I was used to just a different thing at Oklahoma State. I was used to just, you're the elite. You're that 34 national titles, blue chip kid after blue chip kid. How do I go and help a kid truly develop? Kid that might not have been exposed to high level wrestling. How do I help him build that confidence in himself to get to that next level? How do a kid like Alfonso Hernandez, who was a state champion in Blackfoot, Idaho, that's not a 5-star athlete from PA. How do we get him to start believing himself and turn into a 3-time All-American? And it gave me a little bit different perspective that what worked for me might not work for this kid. How do I help this kid develop?
I love it. Well, I'd like to spend more time at some point just talking about your coaching philosophy and your strategy. And there's so much I'm excited about for you getting to Oregon State. One of my heroes, Mark Johnson, was at Oregon State from 90 to 92 after he coached with Gable and really turned it around, man. So I'm excited to see what you guys do. Wish you nothing but the best, Coach.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's always fun to relive the glory days.
Amen. Take care. And all great things must come to an end. If you want to hear more from the podcast, text WRESTLE to 555-888. That's WRESTLE to 555-888. You can also find us on Instagram, Wrestling Changed My Life, Twitter, Ryan_N_Warner, as well as our website, WrestlingChangedMyLife.com. Take care, y'all. Take care, y'all. Take care, y'all. Take care, y'all. Take care, y'all.